How is everyone?
Doing great. Did anybody else get smoky rain on their car last night? It's the
Yes.
weirdest thing.
Yeah, I had that
Yeah,
this morning when I got out.
and I went to the car wash during lunch, and I've never seen it so busy before in my entire life.
That's awesome, Julia. I thought about that, sure.
I spoke to my friends in Bend this morning, and they are getting air quality readings up around 500.
Oof.
Terrible. Yeah. Yeah, when the last bad one we had in Portland, one of our crew, she just drove to Colorado to visit friends. Just her kids were just like coughing at night. She's worked from Colorado for a few days.
Okay, Eric, you're live now.
Okay, great. So we're recording and we are live on stream, so we can get this meeting started. I think we have most of our participants from our TAC online this afternoon, which is great. So with that, Joe, I'm just gonna pass the baton on to you.
Yeah. Okay. Hi, everybody. Good to see you again. I'm going to work from the packet today as opposed to showing a PowerPoint. So I'll share my screen in a moment. But we did a couple of housekeeping items. We did put the meeting summary from our last meeting in the packet. Just to check in, did anybody have any comments or corrections on that? Not seeing any. Okay, great. We'll stay the course with those. The other item that I thought I would do just verbally was the first item in the packet that is labeled updated vision, goals, and evaluation criteria. That is primarily an item for the Community Advisory Committee. They had a very kind of good discussion, quality discussion about some edits to it. In the course of the whole text, they're relatively minor. So I'm going to be, we will be talking to them. Did we get it right? And a lot of it was direct on-screen editing. But just to check in with the group, did anybody have any comments or questions on the update to the vision, goals, and evaluation criteria? And if you want, I can show them, but they were sent out. Okay. See a couple of head nods, no. Okay. Then let's just go ahead and get to our first item of substance. Today is a continuation of what we've been calling the plan concepts for the Sherwood West Concept Plan. Last time we covered mixed employment, green spaces, and some active transportation ideas. And this time we want to focus on street connectivity, LWRT design concepts, and neighborhoods. So let me share my screen here. We'll go to the first of that information. Everybody seeing the aerial photo map on the screen right now? I can't see everybody's faces. So
Yes.
give me yeah, okay, thank you. Let me just adjust my screen here a little bit. Good. So I wanted to start with this map. This is the first page of the plan concept document. This reflects a theme that we heard from the CAC last time, and it came up in some of your comments as well. They are placing a priority on how Sherwood West integrates with the rest of the city. And so we picked up on that and started our connectivity work by making a map of key destinations. This isn't all of them by any means, but some ones that sort of jumped to the forefront. Some of these are direct connections through potential streets. Others are close by to other connections we'll make. And so that is the reason that this context map was put into this document. And you will hear this theme from the team here in several different ways about integrating new Sherwood West with existing Sherwood West, so that, or existing Sherwood, so that it's basically all one. Okay, so let's go on to, and here's where I'm going to have to adjust maps a little bit. I'm going to zoom out and then zoom back in. So the first of two options, what we've done is basically make a street plan for Sherwood West. This is building off of the preliminary concept plan in many ways. The two options for the alignment of Elwert being kind of the most fundamental way. But we've zoomed in and taken a closer look at topography, some of the roads that were placed in the preliminary concept plan, thinking about our updated land uses, that whole set of sort of updated thinking that's been going on in this project. And this is the working first draft of a street plan for the area. So let me go from north to south, and then we'll sort of back up and see what questions and comments you might have. One more check-in. Is this sufficient scale for everybody to see on their screens, or should I zoom in? I get a thumbs up from Glenn. Okay, good. I'll stay at this then. That's easy. So let's look at the northern area. For geographic reference, here's Chicken Creek. I assume you can see my cursor moving. Another thumbs up if you can, okay. So north of Chicken Creek, this is actually a fairly cohesive area geographically between the creek itself and sort of Edie Road locations and where it meets Shoals Sherwood Road and goes off into the countryside. And for context here, you'll remember the mixed employment map, our largest opportunity of continuous blocked up employment land is basically up in this area, quite large, 230 some acres up in this area if the city decides to go with all of it. And so the street system here is really pretty basic. On the east side of Elwert, we've placed new roads, north-south and east-west, that would be roughly 1,000 feet from the intersection of Roy Rogers. And that placement is convenient to trying to form blocks of land that can be developed in flexible modules. So to point one out, the very northeasterly quadrant here is about 40 acres. And so you could develop a 40-acre campus. You could break it into 220s, you could break it into 410s, or even smaller, I suppose, if the particular business needed that. And that's a good rule of thumb in the light industrial sector for campus style development anyway. So that's the reasoning behind these two roads up north. And then the other thing to point out on the west side of Elwert is trying to get the system being a continuous north-south that parallels Elwert for as far as we can go. We didn't cross Chicken Creek again, but that allows all these local trips, or if somebody's trying to go local and then cross over into the other part of the industrial area, they never have to get out onto Elwert or make a left turn on Elwert or any of the other larger roads. And that's another good principle that we've sort of built into the system here. So that's what's going on north of Chicken Creek. To talk about the central area a little bit, the big move is the realignment of Elwert coming across Chicken Creek like so to meet a roundabout and then turn and continue north. For those of you who may not have been with past work, the reason for that is several fold. And there's actually quite focused description of it in the preliminary concept plan. I'll see if I can summarize it correctly. The intersection of Elwert and Edie is in dire need of improvements. It is too low and floodable. It's very constrained with kind of natural resources that butt up right against it. It's a very high traffic crossing. And so it needs to be fixed. And in studying that, the team last time determined that that work is so significant that if you didn't realign this, and I'll show you that map in a moment, but just use your mind's eye to just imagine Elwert going straight and Edie retaining its current alignment. You basically have to shut down that intersection while you do the rebuild. And that's a problem because what do? There might be a way to route traffic around it while you build it in sections, but it's one of those ones where it's very difficult in its implementation. So the city for some time has thought about this realignment, and we've carried it through in this option. Edie Road, as it continues on, goes up the hill to Eastview. Eastview Road is existing. There's quite a change in elevation from where my cursor is right now down to the Chicken Creek Flats. But it looks like you can readily follow a contour coming around like so. So that's the logic behind that loop. And the area north of Edie could be connected any number of ways. So that's what's going on in the central area. And then just to finish out the story, Edie Road would be realigned down to this roundabout and continue south to where it would meet the Hadley extension. And Hadley's an important street because it goes all the way to 99 and basically is the key connectivity to these existing neighborhoods in through this part of Sherwood. So we looked at that, and the previous work did as well. And what we chose to do is extend Hadley west, bring it down to a point that is about 500 feet west of the high school, and then continue it south to the employment areas, one of which has been imagined here and the other is down here, so that there is a continuous parallel road to 99 and existing Sherwood that has that kind of point A to point B connectivity. And in looking at that, it made sense to us to go with what I'll call a lower road, this one, and then its cousin, which would be a higher road paralleling up basically at the top of the ridge. The drainages are split here. So land drains to the west towards the west edge of our study area. It's got hilltop views about where the road is, and then it drains east going the other way. So that's the method, and we just picked some logical places to connect east-west throughout the southern portion of the study area. So that's kind of a quick run through, but the basic logic behind what we have been looking at for this road plan. So let's, I'll stop talking for a moment. Let's go to the northern part of the study area. Let's take the north of Chicken Creek area, if we could, for a moment. And what comments or questions does anybody have about that particular area? And I'm going to have to look at several screens to see hands, so it's okay just to speak up. Comments or questions up in the northern area? Does it look about right? Anything you might do different, or we should study further?
This is Bob. I got a question about the connection on the Roy Rogers from that area. And we know that Shoal Sherwood has a intersection, signalized three-way intersection. What do you plan on doing there at that point? You say it's about 1,000 feet down. Are you going to do another signal?
Frankly, we haven't had any discussion about the intersection type. I don't see that Carl has joined us. He did accept the meeting.
I would have a question about the putting it that close to that signal. In particular, the movements off of from out of that in you're talking a commercial, retail, light industrial area.
Yeah,
right?
light industrial, probably
So,
emphasis on the manufacturing.
right. So they're going
End
to
of it.
want to make left-hand turns and right-hand turns onto Roy Rogers Road.
Yep.
I think left-hand turns are problematic given the type of road, the volume, and the speed of that road with just a basic intersection. So you're looking at another signalized intersection. And I think two signalized intersections at that point would be problematic. I would say that if it's a limited right in, right out, that would probably be more acceptable, but maybe moving it down closer to the actual stream corridor, Chicken Creek corridor down there would be a better acceptable way of dealing with that intersection, because I foresee that it would probably have to also be signalized.
Okay. Jessica, any thoughts from you on along Roy Rogers, the approach?
Really, I mean, the spacing looks fine, and I think without having the traffic analysis, it's hard to tell what the needs and warrants will be.
Okay. All right, we will flag that one. So it's kind of a focal study and during our traffic analysis, but good comments. Anything else on the northern area? Let's go to the central area. So the realignment of Elward, the reconfiguration of Edie Road, how we serve the western area. What thoughts do you have about the central area?
Hey, Joe,
Mm-hmm.
it's kind of hard for me to tell, obviously, and it may be way early for anybody to know, but it's obviously we're going to be coming up Edie Road to respond to from the station or to get into that entire area there. So
Yeah.
with that reconfiguration, it's just going to be critical that, and fire is going to be coming the same direction too, given this setup and the deployment model that we have now. And obviously I can't speak for them, but if we make the assumption that there won't be an additional fire station, then they're going to be going the same direction. So
Right.
ease of navigation, I guess, is just something that we need to remember in terms of being able to get someplace in a hurry in an emergency situation, in particular to the school or schools that are going to be up there.
Okay. All right. Good thought. Anybody else? Something about
Hi,
this?
Joe.
Yeah.
To add on to that, just to keep in mind that given the commercial and light industrial area planned on the north side, plus the farm to market traffic that comes through here from the rural area, west and north, that those types of vehicles would need to be able to traverse a roundabout as well. And then my second thing was more about like whether DSL and Army Corps of Engineers would endorse this idea of abandoning the roadway where it currently crosses the wetland or the creek and doing these two new crossings instead, and what kind of mitigation that would require.
We have not even started that conversation yet. Erica, anything in past discussions with the state or feds about natural resource impacts?
Not to my knowledge. And I wasn't present for the, last preliminary plan to see if they had any
Mhm.
decisions with the state or DSL at that time, but that's something we can definitely look into.
Right. It's a set of trade-offs because the alternative to the alignment is to make improvements at the intersection that exists, and those would continue north basically through the floodplain. Not that that makes it any easier for state and federal permitting. So we will start down that path. Okay. Anything else on the central area? Okay. So let's move to the south here. One thing I forgot to mention was it's sort of implied, but the two north-south roads here are reflective of enough dimension between kind of close to the school and the edge of the study area to merit two roads, but also a fairly intentional effort to get redundancy so that there's multiple ways in and out of each of these hilltop neighborhoods and the southern parts of the plan. So comments on this part of the layout?
My only comments are the east-west connectors between those two parallel roads, and the contours up there. You're talking really, really straight vertical,
Yeah,
that'll be challenging.
yeah.
Those are gonna be meandering roads.
I think you're right. Each one's a little different.
Yeah.
And frankly, if some of them like coalesced a little bit, or I think this is pretty conceptual for those roads in particular.
This is Eva. I really like that you've tried to avoid crossing waterways. And I don't know if that was intentional or not, but it just looks like even if you have some crossings, for the most part, there is a riparian zone and there's kind of a buffer.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you for that.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you for the comment. The only one that we really couldn't work all the way around was this one. And it's in the upland portion.
Yeah.
So you'll see later that we kind of thought it might be a good place for a park.
I would agree.
Yeah. Okay.
Hey, Joe, this is Glenn from ODOT. I really appreciate your very intentional proposal here for having multiple routes and parallel routes. Partly, obviously functioning of 99 being important, but also in our climate world with fires and disasters, I think it's very smart to apply that resiliency to have multiple ways in and out. I have one very small request, and I'll understand if it's not feasible, but there's a project in the TSP known as D11, I think, which is a parallel route where I'm wondering, since you have arrows on other places where the roads would go, where traffic would go, if maybe at the Kruger-Elbert intersection, you could have a little north gray arrow that does northeast gray arrow that just relays to folks that there is that future roadway there at some point in time.
And take me back to the geography of where you are referring.
So it goes. It would basically connect from Handley near where that creek is down to Elbert and Kruger intersection. So it's a parallel route to 99. There's several development sites in there. So ultimately, it will be a private sector that delivered transportation feature. Is my assumption.
On the east side or the west side of Elbert?
It is east of Elbert, heading northeast up to just before the creek on Handley, or just after the creek on Handley.
It's part of the Cedar Brook Way
It's really
extension.
just a dashed line in the TSP. It's a couple arrows.
Okay.
It's described.
And it's project D11.
Yep.
Mhm.
Okay, thanks.
But yeah,
Okay.
this slide, impressive.
We
So,
can, go ahead.
sorry, just
No worries.
again, it's hard to see, and I understand the challenge with the map. I'm not complaining, but the two small roads in between Kruger and Chapman are actually three, I guess. There's three east-west. Yeah, that one, and then the next one. Yeah. What do we have any idea what potentially the zoning could be down there, or could it be wide open? And the reason I ask is because depending on where those roads that have the arrows on the end of them, it seems to be a rather big chunk of ground between Kruger and Chapman from an access perspective. Again, and notwithstanding the comment from our partner about keeping the wetlands clear, but if there's going to be some kind of development on both sides of that, I'm always thinking about being someplace where something goes down and you're really close geographically. You're really far from a transportation perspective. So, and I know we also our friends at ODOT like to protect the flow along 99W, but if there was some kind of, again, it's all going to be dependent upon, what's going to end up there potentially.
Yeah.
If it's more park space, open space, then probably less of a concern. But if it's something we need to respond to, it would really stink to be on 99W and potentially see the problem and yet be 3 to 5 minutes away because of the way you have to transverse to get to it. So.
Okay. No, I understand. Well, it's early in the land use sort of coloring of the map, so to speak, but from our discussions to date, this area where my cursor is right now, just south of Kruger, is one of the candidate employment areas. Exactly how far west it goes is to be determined. It'll transition to residential at some point in through this area. So that's one direction we have so far. And then the other version of that is down in this area, which would also be an employment designation, visible from 99, gateway to the city, and it also would transition to residential. I think it's likely that there will be sort of medium densities closer to this road and lower densities up on top. The middle housing implementation sort of turns that a little bit on its head, but anyway, residential west and those two employment areas east. So our challenge is ideally what you would like to kind of serve the close and accessible needs is a crossing of Goose Creek down in this area.
Not necessarily. I think with this, if the zoning were to go the way you described, we want to get in there. Actually, Goose Creek helps us because it's right in the middle. And so, the middle is the furthest point from both ends. So if we could even somehow from that Kruger Elbert, where right there where it takes that sharp bend, if we could do like a northern half of a frontage that would get us into that.
Yep.
Do the same thing on the bottom, on the very southern end, some kind of off of Chapman right there.
Right.
Some kind of which it's already kind of built on that piece there. So I think
sorry, go ahead.
I'm sorry, Joe. Those would be my thoughts. That if the plan is to leave that Goose Creek, that entire wetlands thing undeveloped, then that's actually going to help us. And as long as we have some side access points, otherwise we're going all the way back to that first intersection, making a left turn, making another left turn to come and have to come in the back door. And we don't, from an emergency response and a tactical perspective, we would much rather be able to surround a problem than just be one-sided. So.
And those might be emergency access types, driveways that are for emergency responders, as opposed to full access streets, right, Chief?
I suppose, but what ends up happening is then they end up getting blocked off. And so then now we got to keys and
Okay.
getting out and moving bollards. And so that's better than nothing, but just things to put in the notes and think about as we move forward.
Gotcha. Okay. Let's move on to the next map, which really the only difference is the central area. Elwert is carried as it's a current alignment, same with Edie. And then the local road system is reorganized to respond to that as opposed to the redevelopment.
And I think Ryan had a question. I see your hand is raised.
Go ahead, Ryan.
Oh, yeah, thanks, Joe. Yeah, I was late to the game. So I know we've got those sections knocked out for employment areas, and I'm assuming those are kind of placeholders to get us to where we're at, right? We have to have some type of framework. Are those kind of set in stone now, or did that kind of come out of the CAC more where those are definite employment areas, or since we're designing roads through them?
Not set in stone. The next phase of our work, roughly on the calendar of October, November, is where we'll start filling in land uses and look at alternatives. So if we were to make some adjustments in what is employment, in what I've described as employment to residential, let's say, we'd look at the road system update.
Thanks, Joe. I was going to wait till the walkable neighborhoods discussion to bring that point up, but I was just, since we started to talk about running lines through there and kind of came up, so, okay.
Yeah. Thank you, Erica, for helping me see who's trying to talk here. My screens are a little challenging in that respect.
No problem.
Okay, all right. So any comments on the other option? Otherwise, we'll move on to Elwert. Good feedback on the street plan.
Actually, Joe, this is Glenn again, real
Yeah.
quick. I appreciate your note about future planning and study for Chapman and Brookman. Just for folks who don't know, that's an unsignalized intersection now and a relatively high-speed area. So definitely takes some work to figure out what happens there that is safe and provides the needed access to properties. So thanks for calling that out. Just want to make sure everyone is aware that is something that isn't set in stone yet.
Okay. All right, I'm going to move us ahead to Elwert. I think it's pretty obvious that it is an important street serving this project area. We started with studying some of the existing conditions that were compiled on this slide. It obviously has a lot of length to it, a lot of different existing settings. And so let's go right to the next slide here. Next page. Throughout the conversation so far, we've had multiple mentions of Sunset Boulevard in Sherwood as being a pretty successful street and something that we ought to take a look at, maybe not copy, but at least take a look at to learn from it for Elwert. And here we are I don't know how long it's been, 20-ish years since Woodhaven was designed and began construction. And here's our catalog of what Sunset tells us today. It's got the generous buffering of the sidewalks, pretty safe crossings, these path connections where you don't have a street, they're very obvious and direct that come out of the neighborhoods. Planted median, canopy of the trees, a consistent fence line. And some of this is reflective of good public decision-making, and some of it is reflective of the master plan community kind of genesis of the area. But we cataloged this before we made the next slide of what we might suggest for Elwert. Let me pause here and sort of tap into your knowledge of Sunset or even other precedent streets that help us learn for Elwert. What would anybody add to this list?
I'd add better bike facilities today than today's planning realm.
Mm-hmm. Yep. There isn't transit along Sunset. So maybe that's another key difference, is that at least being transit ready is one of the principles that we put out for Elward. And that doesn't change the street a lot, but it's a factor. Okay.
So I have a comment. So this the first image is where school kids cross. And I know that one of the parents in particular found that just the striping on the roadway was inadequate, and she wanted some type of rapid flashing beacon. So maybe clearly identifying those, but it's somewhat hard where we only know about the high school, but we don't know any other potential future school district sites.
Within Sherwood West, but of course, close by is a school that kids may be walking to and crossing Elward to the east side.
Right. So one of the key elements definitely in regards to safe routes to school is identifying potential walking sheds, as far as safe routes to school walking sheds.
Great. Okay. Any other issues or observations?
Joe, this spot.
Yeah, go ahead, Bob.
Okay, one of the things that we know that isn't showing up on your photos here of Sunset is where it's crossing stream corridors and wetland areas. The roads are, or even the railroad crossing, the road section narrows down and it becomes very difficult. So both for pedestrians and car traffic. So I would say if you're going to do this Sunset type corridor, make it consistent throughout the entire length of it. Don't try and, if you're going to go through a wetland area, try and narrow it up so that the impacts are minimized or the cost minimized. Keep it uniform because it creates problems, not only for maintenance, but for ped usage and everything else.
Okay. Thank you. All right, so let's take a look at the concept map. I think I'll go from south to north. So the high school section is obviously newly built. I don't know, I can't recall to what extent they completed the east side of the street, but the cross section is basically kind of set. I'll be interested in any comments that folks have about that. But then what we sort of hit on was that the character north of Haiti, from Haiti up to the Chicken Creek crossing area, is a pretty important area to try and get those qualities. They may not be exactly the same, but they'll get those qualities that that Sunset has. So it's pedestrian oriented. There's a multi-use path that would go north from the high school. The fencing might be made consistent, similar to, and the idea being to try and think of the areas on the west and the east side of Elward as being knit together by the street design. A couple of differences I'll pick up on the comments that you all just had is bike facilities need to be more obvious and modern. And one of the principles we hit on is that this area should be transit ready in the future. So that's the thinking behind the purple section. For the crossing of Chicken Creek, Bob, we kind of went the other direction, not thinking about maintenance and so on. You're clearly not in the same crossing walking zone, but you do want to plan it for good pedestrian and bike facilities. So trying to keep the entire design kind of a little bit more on the natural end. I think there's a balance between operations and maintenance and so on, and how we specifically do that. Envisioning either a bridged crossing or a large box culvert. I don't know which would work in the specific geography, but so that there's wildlife passage and good water passage underneath. And for any bridge crossing, that's a good public viewpoint. So that's the idea there. Then more residential boulevard, more green crossing. If this area is developed for residential, we'd repeat the residential boulevard and then transition to a little bit more of an employment parkway kind of condition. So some differences to reflect the uses of the area and the characters of the segments of Elwert. But again, I'm going to kind of reflect back that maybe our challenge is, can we do that and also get the consistency that's needed for the functioning of the road? Okay, let's open it up to comments. Any section of it you want to talk about? While you're thinking, we did convene, or the city convened a discussion with the county, trying to think through into the future. Hey, whose street is this in the future? Because it's county jurisdiction now. But these design concepts are pretty much premised on this transitioning to city jurisdiction at some point. Comments, questions, pros, cons? Love it, hate it?
This is Julia. I guess I have a comment / question on the high school edge gateway. Just a reminder that we have a plan to do the pedestrian overcrossing and whether or not we want to acknowledge that in this or not.
Yep. Good add. We definitely should.
I have a question too on where it says the multi-use path was recently built down by the high school should extend north. Would that extend along the whole length of Elwert?
We think so. These concepts are that it would continue north all the way to Sherwood. And we have a trails map that's sort of emerging out of the work that it would connect to for east-west trails.
Joe, kind of on that same thought with the multi-use path going all the way, and then I assume it jumps up onto the green crossings area and then off again. Is that the idea for pedestrian movement versus just going off to a trail?
No, it would continue across these green segments.
Right.
And, you might, it might be a combined, multi-use path is both ped and bike anyway. So I could foresee basically the multi-use path serving as one edge of the crossing.
And one other just thought, if you remember from our Cooper Mountain meeting on the parks last week or 2 weeks ago, whatever that was, just with the crossings for the wildlife to make sure they're built in a way that would actually attract wildlife to use them.
Yeah.
So it's not just a size thing, it's, that other stuff, but
yep.
You'll probably be doing that with a number of these projects.
Yeah. Okay, any other thoughts? Ready to move on? If you think of something, we can come back. Okay, we'll keep rolling. The last concept is entitled Great Neighborhoods, and this is really the first step towards filling in land uses into the plan. The actual looking at densities and more specific land use mapping is for the work that I mentioned earlier, probably October-ish timeframe. But we wanted to introduce the idea of walkable neighborhoods as a fundamental design principle. So that's what all these pictures about. And the narrative basically describes that. And so we set about studying the walkability of the various portions of the plan. And I'll also characterize this as kind of a second generation of the work that was done in the preliminary plan. And so looking at topography, looking at natural edges, looking at existing development, it looked to us like the walkable areas kind of framed up something like this map, and I'll take you through the logic. Again, if we consider this area, that will end up being all mixed employment. The edge of it might change a little bit, but for our purposes, there's sort of a residual area that is defined as walkable. That would be north of Chicken Creek. Of course, if the crossings are done well and you live right here, getting over to your neighbor over here is going to be pretty easy as well. But that gets me to the second area of kind of cohesive land. It's a bubble of land to the west of Chicken Creek. It's got some topography to it, but there was not really a logical break in our study of breaking this into more than one walkable area. And there's really no particular science to this. It's really some judgment calls of what we think are cohesive areas. So another one framed by Edie Road, north of Edie Road and Chicken Creek, sort of a residual area that would be formed by the realignment of Edie. And interesting how what would happen is that this area would actually be right adjacent to the edge of the existing neighborhood. And there's a pedestrian crossing here. So we could envision people living here and walking across that pretty readily and going down to school. The largest continuous sort of flat area, and I'll say it's flat-ish because it's not completely flat, is north of Haiti. So that is pretty close to a quarter-mile type neighborhood. If you were to live in this neighborhood, there's so much green space on the edge that you're never more than a block or two or three from where the green spaces are. So that's going to be pretty special. And then we took a look at the southern areas, which topographically pretty much break up into a ridgetop area. And the previous plan identified an actual land use type called hilltop residential. And then the areas that are on what I'll call the eastern flanks, just uphill from the high school or just adjacent to the Goose Creek area. And here's another one. Again, these are probably more grayish lines than hard lines between these areas. But this is how our study of how the walkable neighborhoods would shape up. Let me continue with going, and then we'll come back to this. So based on that, we took a look at connected parks and schools and green spaces. We don't have guidance yet on schools. So that's sort of a missing piece to be filled in as the work continues. but we just took a few initial guesses at how parks might be arranged, sort of following the principle of about one neighborhood park per neighborhood area, and trying to place them consistent with trail connections and natural features and so on. And so that's what the little green blobs are, is a very conceptual arrangement of parks serving these areas. They serve not only the residential neighborhoods, but they're envisioned to serve the employment areas as well. And our squiggly lines up here are sort of a running loop for the industrial area. So if you want to get out and take a little 2-mile run close to your business, and there's actually quite a number of these through the high-tech areas of Washington County, where trails have been built in near some of the industrial parks and so on. So that's what this line work is. And then finally, a combination of trails like the Chicken Creek Greenway Trail, and then what might be envisioned as more of multi-use paths or just intentional pedestrian path streets, so that you could get from this park to this park down to Chicken Creek, and you're following a continuously planned kind of pedestrian route. Okay, so that's a lot to drink in between the two maps. Let's back up one and see if, just in the basic thinking of walkable areas, if you had any comments on this particular diagram. Okay, I'll keep us rolling up to the next one.
Joe,
Oh, yeah.
just Bob. As with the pedestrian corridor alignment, stuff like that, the ped bridge over the highway at Kruger Elbert Highway 99 intersection.
Yep.
That would be good to show on this one too.
Good. Let's move to the other one and see what ideas or questions this sparks. Maybe to hit a couple more highlights. The Chicken Creek Greenway Trail would be this one. And you can follow it all the way over to the new city park and this employment system up here. And then it was a comment from one of the CAC members last time that they thought it was beneficial to have a parallel route on the north side of Chicken Creek. So that helped us frame up this trail system like so. So parks and trails and connecting to schools. Thoughts on any of these ideas?
Hey, Joe, it's Tim. It seems to make sense to me. Very logical laying out of the trails through the neighborhoods and so on. Just to confirm, the various parks could be a neighborhood park or a natural resource area that are shown. That nothing's been identified yet, correct?
Correct. Yeah, the city does have park planning standards. We'll have to get our heads into that a little bit. But my sense is there's probably flexibility where you could envision, like this one down here might be sort of a neighborhood park with a hilltop kind of or viewpoint kind of quality to it. This one might be more of a public space where the existing tree canopy is kept and it's more natural.
Mm-hmm.
And then you're back to a neighborhood park up here. What we don't have is a community scale park, and we kind of don't really have much in the way of guidance on that at this point.
So for the Sherwood staffers, I would just say, remember Cedar Creek Trail, and my comments would be ditto. Same thoughts and suggestions about multi-mode access and response capabilities and so on and so forth.
Mhm.
Meaning a lot of different ways to get to the trail for responders.
Well, yeah, and you figure somebody's inevitably going to be right in the middle of a mile-long stretch, and
Yep.
how are we going to get to them? And then making sure the trail is suitable for some kind of alternate mode of transportation so that we can get to people quicker and transport them out on some way other than on our backs.
Yeah. Is Chicken Creek, is Cedar Creek a good example, or has it got some challenges and lessons learned?
No, it's a good example. That's what I'm saying. Yeah. So,
Okay.
I mean, they've got all that stuff, but that's the process that we went in the comments and
Yep.
dialogue we had on that. I would just apply that to this. And that's not to say that every foot of every trail needs to be the same way, but just having that perspective when the trails are finally designed,
Got it.
which of course is a long ways from today, but.
Yeah.
And I like the fact that you're thinking about multi-use, because we can't do that on the refuge. Our first priority is wildlife, and we kind of, every decision we make is gauged against that.
Mhm.
So having multi-use is good, because then they have options. If they want to go run, or if they want to bring their dog, they can go to a city park as opposed to the refuge. And I would also say, because I have a best friend with a special needs child, and you guys have probably already thought about this, but having a park or two that specifically caters to kids with special needs. And and it's not just physical, it's also, there's just varied degrees and varied ways you can do it and still let kids be safe, without it being a traditional kids park, because those are not always safe for kids that have other needs. So.
Great. Okay. Other
One
comments,
other-
ideas? Go ahead, Tim.
Yeah, one other just question, and I remember, for like athletic fields and so on, do they share with the high school fields? Is that something the community can do versus providing some other kind of athletic fields in this general area?
Anybody know?
I'm not sure if Craig or Kristen are on. We used to have an agreement with the schools where we actually managed the scheduling of the fields and, to a certain degree, the maintenance of the fields. When they did the new high school, they decided they wanted to take that back. So I'm not honestly not positive if leagues and things like that I assume they're using the fields, but the city isn't a partner with them on that. That's not to say that won't change again in the future. I mean, I think they are available. It's just not the city running it.
And I would say I would say it's twofold, and this is more of a citizen, not a Fish and Wildlife Service thing. Because I remember in the high school, and I went to high school in Southern California, anybody could just walk onto our track and just exercise. It wasn't just for students, but then you also had those like tournaments that were more of an organized thing that folks were allowed to use those school facilities. So, both of those issues.
And that is the way it is here as well, except during school times. I don't believe the public is allowed on the school grounds during school, but after school they are.
Yeah, this is Ryan. Along those lines, I know I dealt with this in not this jurisdiction when I was at Southwest Washington, though. I think it would be important to find out what that relationship was with the school system. If we're going to be considering, as part of this package, levels of service for parks, we want to figure out how that, school use or other trail use is incorporated in that level of service.
Great. Okay. Other
And Joe-
comments or questions on this?
Yeah, Joe, this is Matt Craigie, Washington County Economic Development. Just an observation, the overlay of the kind of collector roads and the parks and trails in the employment area makes for some pretty funny potential shapes of larger parcels, which of course would probably be broken up to smaller ones. And I look to Bruce Coleman to help me understand the size of these shapes. Maybe they are larger than I think that they are, but maybe there would be some consideration around kind of if the BPA transmission lines aren't going anywhere anytime soon. And so that's kind of a thing, but maybe there's another alignment to help create more developable parcels in that area, because you're getting some really funny shapes in there. So some small triangles and whatnot. So Bruce, maybe you have an answer for that, but you're muted, Bruce.
Any comments on that, Bruce?
Yeah, I think I'm on. So I was looking at that, and I was a little concerned in looking at that to see whether that's going to fit with some kind of a campus type development. Because if we get very solid on this is the exact locations, and it's not exact locations where all these roads are going to be going through, I don't know that we've gotten any input from any developers that might look at a campus type setting or a development of an employment type center in that area. And I'm wondering how we can get that input into the process before these become very solid lines and they become somehow adopted streets. And then we don't really have a campus type setting anymore, or we may have some difficulty with the employment type development. So I don't know the answer to that. That was something I was going to raise to Erica, but I'm glad Matt brought it up.
Hey, Bruce, this is Gabrielle. I can respond to that a little bit. Representing NAIOP, if I can get maybe some more zoomed in maps from the consultant team from a NAIOP perspective, I'm happy to circulate that to a couple brokers or developers and have them take a look at. But it's really hard to tell at this scale, so I can get some zoomed in maps. I'm happy to circulate them and provide that feedback.
That would be much appreciated. Thanks, Gabriella.
Yeah, I think it'd be great too. And actually, we have in our scope to do a second round. We kind of anticipated this, that we'd learn some things and then want to circle back to either NAIOP or some of the interviewees that we talked to early. So let's make that a plan. And I think that'll be super helpful. And to give you a sense of scale, this area right here is almost a perfect 160 acres. So this block is about 40 acres. And the other quadrants are about 40 as well. So it depends a little bit in how you would configure a campus and how big it is. But all of these are good considerations. My sense is there won't be a perfect way to organize it, but there may be a sort of a best of the choices. Okay. Any other comments on any of the issues we've talked about? Trails, parks, roads? Erica, that's all I have for presentation. Let me go on. I'm sorry. The last piece of this, it was informational. I should mention this as well. So we're moving to the land use work here after we touch base with the community in early October. And so we are anticipating the range of housing types, including middle housing, that the city has been discussing in its middle housing project. There will be allowances for pretty much everything you see on the screen. Maybe the most urban choices being subject to some discussion, but a range pretty close to what we put into this packet. So we wanted to communicate that and have it part of the discussion process. We are in conversation with the state to understand how the middle housing statute applies in expansion areas. We learned some things in discussion with them last week, and that'll continue to evolve. So that's what this set of images is about, and why we put it in the packet. Any comments, opinions, advice on housing types as we move towards that work?
Well, backing up, this is Glenn. Just one moment. Just now you're talking about land use. I see the larger scale employment. I see the housing. Are you looking at any local services maybe tied to that? I know, like Hillsborough, for example, you get a certain number of square feet of industrial in, and then you can get the coffee shop, the restaurant, the things to serve those folks, so they can eat on site or nearby, and maybe walk and get a beer after work, that kind of sort of thing.
Yeah, that's sort of been assumed, that small scale commercial would be part of the northern area. The central area down on Kruger may actually have a little bit more of a neighborhood commercial component to it. It's to be determined what this area. So short answer is yes, Glenn. I will share with you that in looking at a potential neighborhood commercial node in sort of the Haiti to Hanley section here, there was not a lot of enthusiasm for that at the Community Advisory Committee. It's still early, I think, but I did want to share that feedback that we got last time.
No, that's interesting. I know that in my neighborhood, the coffee shops are swarmed when there's high school activities, soccer, football, etc. So I thought people would have wanted that.
Yeah. Okay, open for any last comments, questions, directions on this work. Go ahead and unshare here. There you all are. Ryan, did you have another comment, or is your hand up from a previous?
Oops, that was number 4. My bad. Let me take that down.
Okay, no worries. Okay. That is our agenda. It looks like we may finish early. I could start making some things up if you wanted to keep talking all the way until 4, but no. Erica, for the group, I did have a question offline from this meeting about what the council discussed relative to a UGB ask. Can you share with everybody what the council direction was?
Yeah, certainly. So council had a conversation about a mid-cycle ask to Metro for an urban growth boundary expansion this year. They had that conversation at their council meeting in August, just last month, just a couple of weeks ago. And they decided not to move forward at this time with a ask because we have, we're in the middle of, updating, the plan that we have now. And really felt since we're in this process and being, transparent about it, that it just wasn't the best time. And I don't know, Julia, if you're still on the line, if you have anything to add.
I am still on the line. I don't really have anything to add, except Tim, we are planning on getting a letter of some sort to the Metro Council just to let them know. I think word is out, but we want to outline a little bit more clearly the reasons, because we are appreciative of the Metro Council granting us time to think about what we wanted to do. So we don't want them to think we don't appreciate that. So we want to outline the why, and we, I believe, still do intend to be prepared for something during the legislative process.
Sounds great, Julia. Thanks. And Erica.
Actually, this is Ryan. For Eric and Julia, a quick question about that. So how do you envision this working to, as we get like farther down the path with this project, do you envision like a smaller subgroup or having kind of designating part of this project as something that you think you'd want to include in a future ask? I mean, I know that the council is very kind of wanted to have this be, very informative of that process. So I was wondering if there's a thought, or I'm just premature in that question.
Yeah, I don't think we fully know. I think this process will help inform that discussion. And that's another reason why they didn't direct us to move forward, is I think we don't know enough yet to make a good choice on what areas we were going to ask for. But hopefully through this process and at the end of this process, we'll be in a better position to do that.
Okay. All right. So next steps are you all get a break for a while. We're going to do a community open house in October and an online version of it. And we'll reconvene the committees after that. And so that's where we're headed next. Erica, any last items from you?
My only parting words is that when we do this online open house, we will be sending out all the information to you so you can share with your colleagues as well.
Okay, then it looks like that's a wrap for today. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate all the good comments and see you soon.